Hello, it's Keith here, and this is lesson 14 of the platform-specific series of my 6502 assembly programming tutorials. We've been looking at various systems and how to read in the joysticks, joypads from those systems over the last couple of weeks. We're continuing this week with the PC Engine, also known as the TurboGrafx-16 in the US. Now, this isn't a system that a lot of people will be familiar with. I really never heard of it until I came to Japan, but I was lucky enough to get a cheap PC Engine, and it's really quite a nice system. One rather surprising thing about it though is it only has one joystick port on the hardware itself. However, it does have a splitter device which allows up to 5 joysticks. So that's what we're going to be looking at. We're only going to be reading in 2 of the joysticks today, but the principle is the same for reading in more than that. So how do we actually read in the joysticks on the PC Engine? Well, fortunately, it's not too difficult for us. What we have is a port, IO port 1000, and what we can do is we can write to that port to do an initialization. This will effectively reset the port, and it will mean that we will start reading in from the joysticks again. We need to do this so we know what joystick and what keys from that joystick we're reading in from. Then what we do is we toggle repeatedly, writing repeatedly to bit 0. And when we write a 1 to that bit, we will get the up, down, left and right positions. And when we write a 0, we will get A, B, start and the run button. Now, we alternate between 1s and 0s, but once we've read in the first joystick's buttons, we will then get the second one. And if we continued, we get the third, fourth and fifth as well, but we're not going to in these tutorials. Now, if you've followed these tutorials before, you'll know we use a common format in these tutorials. We use up, down, left and right as bits 0 to 3, fire 1, fire 2 and fire 3 where available, but the run button will be fire 3 in this case, and we have a start button as bit 7. We've been using these on the Z80, 6502 and 68000 tutorials, and player 1 will be read into ZH, that's a 0 page entry that we've defined by a symbol, and ZL will be player 2. We won't be reading in players 3, 4 and 5, so if you need those you're going to have to write the code yourself, but it's going to be pretty straightforward to do that. So let's see today's code in action, then I'll just run it now. So all we're doing is we're using the command read controls dual, which reads in the ZH and ZL entries, and then we're showing them to the screen in the top corner, as you can see here. So you can see here, if I press up, down, left, right, right, fire 1, fire 2, and then we've got select here, and there's start, and up, down, left, right, fire 1, fire 2, and select here, and then start here. Now, I should point out, I'm calling it select. I'm using some Super Nintendo pads here, but it's actually called select and run, I think it is, on the real joypads. But anyway, you can see there we're successfully reading in from 2 joypads there. So how do we actually do it? Let's take a look at the code that's doing the work for us today. It's not too complicated. So what we have to do is we effectively have to initialize the joypads, reset everything so that we can start reading in. And the way we do this is we write to port hexadecimal 1000. Now we're using this send command function here, which is going to do all of our writing for us. What we're using is we're using the X register here for the value we want to send to port 1000, and then we've just got a few commands here as a delay because we have to wait a little while for the hardware that reads the joystick in to actually respond to that command before we try and read in. So we're writing our X register to hexadecimal 1000, and then we're reading into the accumulator from that address. Now we don't actually need to read in during the initialization phase. I'm just using this as a common function because reading in doesn't do any harm, and we will definitely need to read in when it comes to reading in our directions and our fire buttons. So how do we actually do the initialization? Well, first what we need to do is we need to set bit 1 to 0, and that is just the first part of the initialization, and then we write that to port hexadecimal 1000, and then we set bit 1 to 1, and that does the clear, and when we do that we've then reset and we're ready to start reading in our joysticks again. Now we've got this function, as in a lot of cases we've got this common function called read controls 1. We're going to run this twice. The first time we're going to run it, we're going to be reading in pad 1. The second time we run it, we're going to be reading in pad 2. Now, as I said before, the only difference between reading in pad 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5 is the time that we do it. The first pad we read in is to pad 1. The second pad is pad 2, the third pad would be pad 3, pad 4, pad 5. So we could actually just use this same function to read in the other pads if we had a reason to do that. But just beware, as I've said before, the PC Engine by default only has 1 joypad, so you can't really rely on someone having 5 joypads there because while it's possible, it's not particularly common. So when it comes to actually reading in, what do we need to do? Well, first of all, we need to read in the up, down, left and right state. So we set X to 1 here and we send that command, and then we read in. We're shifting the bits around here. We'll have a look at that in just a moment. And then we're reading in the second lot. We're decreasing X. This time we're going to send a 0 and we're reading in again. Now if you look here, we're effectively setting bit 0 here. So first we needed to set it to a 1 and we get these. Then we set it to a 0 and then we get these. And as I said before, when we do the same procedure again, we then get the second controller's buttons. So that's how we're getting our controller read in, but we do need to swap things around. We want up, down, left and right in bits 0 to 3, but what we're actually getting is left, down, right and up. So we've got this function here which is swapping the bits around for us with a few bit shifts here. And then when it comes to our run, start, B and A, we actually need to alternate these bits around into the opposite order. And so we've just got a loop here that is doing that for us. You're doing a few rotations here just to shift our bits along. And that's really all there is to reading in the joystick on the PC Engine here. As you can see, most of the code here is actually just about reorganizing the buttons so that they're in the correct format that we need, because while the fire buttons are okay, the left, right, up and down are in the wrong order for what we require for our code here, because we need this common format for all of our systems. That's of course relating to making our games easily to port between the 6502 systems and the Z80 if we require. So that's all there is to it. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this. We're going to be looking at the NES and the Super Nintendo next week. They actually use the same hardware basically, so that should be quite interesting. Anyway, I hope you found this interesting. Thanks for watching and goodbye.